Welcome back to Leatherheads Footy. My name's Morgan, and on this video I'm going to be going through the most selected players in AFL Fantasy for 2023. I'm going to be picking my team live and giving my thoughts on each of these most selected players. Starting with Will Ashcroft, pick number 2 to the Lions. He is the most obvious selection, had a really dominant junior campaign numbers-wise, but also picked up all of the accolades, was named captain of the NAB League Team of the Year, won the Lark Medal for the best player in the Under-18 National Championships. He didn't win the Morris Medal for the best player in the NAB League, but that was a little bit of a surprise. Maybe just had a bit of an even contribution at the Sandy Dragons. But I think absolute lock at his price, coming in priced at 33. He will exceed that comfortably. He's starting inside the centre bounce for the Brisbane Lions and rotating through half forward. So he'll comfortably average 70, I'd say. Watching the practice match against the Swans, he was incredible. Super impressive just how quick and clean he is, his ability to get the ball in a stoppage and then get it to his boot. Absolute lock. So I'm going to pick him as my first picked player and understand why he is the most selected player in the game. Don't overthink that one. Next up is Josh Dunkley. This gets a little bit more interesting. Mid-forward status is probably the reason why I will pick him, but I don't think it's necessarily a lock. He's priced fairly highly. If he was in the midfield and he's priced at 109, you're still thinking maybe he's maxed out in price and you might be able to get him if you do want him later on in the season when he's dropped a little bit. But I've had to think about it. With the forward status, absolute worst case scenario is he averages 95 to 100. Now, I don't think he's going to do that, but absolute worst case scenario, say he averages 100, he still doesn't lose enough money that you've wasted the pick. You've saved a trade starting him in your team because he's still going to be a top 6 forward. So absolute worst case scenario, I still think he's an okay pick. That being said, you just have to keep in mind the reason you're picking Dunkley at this price is to save a trade. So if you pick him, you cannot trade him out of your team because that goes against the logic behind picking him in the first place. So I'm going to lock in Dunkley as a forward. Whether you pick him midfield or forward just depends on your structure, but for me, he's going to start in the forward line. Next up, Tim Taranto. Similar case with Dunkley, except he's only priced at 95, which I think makes it an easier decision. Watching the match sim with the Tigers, he's locked in that on-ball rotation. Him, Hopper, Prestia, and to a lesser extent, Jaden Short. I think Short would be the first one to miss out, and Short was the fourth midfielder. He never started on the ground. He was always starting on the bench and coming on, and Taranto played the majority. He's got the best aerobic capacity of those midfielders, so he'll hopefully get a little bit more time on ground. Tigers' style, there's been talk of it, doesn't necessarily lend itself to fantasy players, but they haven't really had a player of the caliber of Taranto. He's just really high tackle and mark numbers, which we love to see. So similar to Dunkley, except I think he's even more of an obvious selection. Priced at 95, I think he can comfortably match that, which would have him as a top 6 forward or even exceed that. So I'm going to select him as a forward as well. Campbell Chesser was one that did play in the intra-club or the preseason match for the Eagles. Did a couple of nice things, but really only a couple. So I wouldn't be expecting him to do too much. And they did have a couple of players still out. Luke Shuey's still got to come back into that team. So whether he comes more inside and then pushes another guy to the wing and maybe Chesser comes out of the team, because I was doing a bit of a best 22 before. They've actually got quite a strong lineup if everyone's fit. It's a big if, considering how things went last year. But I think Chesser's a guy, if he is picked, just because of the dearth of defensive rookies, his basement price adds a little bit of flexibility with his dual position status. I think you pick him. So I'm going to pick him, and he's just going to be a placeholder on the bench. I wouldn't be starting him on the field at this stage. But if he is picked, I think he's a good selection. Philippou, he's a guy that I'm probably not as confident in. He did look really good, though, against Melbourne. Started off slowly, but watching that game back, a lot of the time he was playing against Jake Lever and or Stephen May. This due to a couple of things, mainly because St Kilda don't have any tall forwards at the moment. They're all injured, basically. So Philippou was playing almost as a full forward and playing against Melbourne. Melbourne were very dominant in that game, and they've got really, really like elite key defenders. So he was going to have a hard time of it, but he did work into the game and took some strong pack marks, which like that's going to be the toughest area of him to score in, is taking contested marks. He should be able to link up around the ground, and especially once he gets the pace of the AFL, I'd be expecting him to start relatively slowly but work into it. He's a guy that you probably hold a little bit longer than some of the rookies. With these higher draft picks, I treat them a little bit differently. They're not guys like, for me, a Chesser. He's a guy that if he's picked, I'm going to put him. He is a high draft pick, but just comparing him and Philippou, I'm going to pick him if he's named, and he's going to go on my bench, and then at first sign of resting, traded out of the team, I'm going to look to downgrade and upgrade elsewhere. With Philippou, he's a guy that I might even hold on to if he is rested, because I think he'll get better throughout the year. We saw that with a few guys last season, like a Jake Saligo, debuted early, had a rest, came back and scored even better. Josh Ward debuted early, wasn't amazing, but then came back and scored a lot better. So he's a guy that, yeah, I'm not completely sold on, but I'm at this stage, I'm thinking, with the way the rookie situation is, going to have to go pretty heavy on the rookies through the midfield, because there's so many good value options up forward and so few rookies down back that probably have the majority of the rookies in the midfield. So for me, I'm going to select Philippou as a midfielder, and then the only decision will be whether he plays on field. At this stage, I wouldn't have him playing on field. Ruben Jinby, he is a guy that there's been lots of hype about. I'm a little bit cagey. He's probably a guy that I will pick, similar to Chesser, especially if it sounds like he's going to have good job security at the Eagles. But he's never been a good scorer. And the way he plays, he's very much an inside player. Hopefully will start tackling a little bit more, but not a high disposal winner and very handball happy. So the one upside for him is he does have the physicality to match it at AFL level. I'm pretty confident in that. And he's got the athleticism too. So it's just whether he'll be able to find enough of the ball and whether he can get those marks on the outside. That's the main area I see in his game. If he plays next week and he's getting a few marks around the ground, then I'll lock him in and probably start him on field. But as I mentioned before, because of the way the defenders are, I think he's a guy that you probably have to pick. Nick Dacos, an elite scorer. Like, I'll start with that. He averaged, I think, 120 in his NAB league, came into the AFL, averaged 87 off a half-back line in his first year, and became the Magpies' most damaging player. I think that's safe to say, especially their most damaging halfback. With his run, his creativity, his decision-making, his vision, his execution of his skills, it's just incredible. He loves the footy in his hands too. You can see by how aggressively he calls for it. He likes linking up for a 1-2 to double up his stats there. And I can see him just working his way around the ground, especially on the MCG, where the Magpies will play a lot of games. There's a lot of space, and his work rate is second to none. He'll run really, really hard to get those chip marks coming out of defence. So for me, he's one that I don't think you should really overthink, because he averaged 87 last year. You only really need to get to 95 to be a top 6 defender. A little bit of natural progression, or even some of those top defenders dropping off, and he's a top 6 defender without having to do too much. Might get a little bit of a tag, but I really don't see that happening. Like, he got tagged by Sydney, and I think that's where people started to get a little bit worried. But Sydney were pretty much the only team, or one of only a couple of teams who ever tagged a halfback. It might be something that's coming into vogue a little bit, but apart from them, I can't really see anyone tagging Nick Dacos. Really. You'd tag De Goey surely first, but yeah, you don't really tag halfbacks, especially second-year players. So for me, that has him in my team. Will Phillips, coming into his third year but missed the whole of last year due to glandular fever, has him priced around the same as these guys coming into their first season. He will be playing some inside midfield at the Kangaroos, maybe coming off the bench, maybe a little bit on a wing. But he's just really tough, committed, potential captain of the Kangaroos in the future. And at his price, I think he's a guy that you can select very safely, and with Ashcroft, he'll be one of the rookies that many people will be starting on field. Darcy Wilmot, another defender. It's interesting. This kind of shows the state of the defensive line in that a vast majority of these highly selected players are in the defense and defense rookies. So it shows that there's really not many options, and the way that's coming to the fore is that the few options that we do have are in pretty much everyone's team. Wilmot looks like he's playing on the wing. There weren't too many players to come back into that Brisbane Lions team. The only one would be maybe a Zorko, but I'm expecting Zorko to play more forward with little stints on ball, not on the wing. And the wing's a place that the Lions haven't really had too many options. They've had to play guys that aren't really natural wingers, like a Devon Robertson was playing a little bit on the wing. Jared Berry, I quite like him as a taller, stronger winger, but he might get a little bit of time inside. So I think Wilmot adds a little bit of a point of difference to the Brisbane team on the wing. And as a defender, coming in at basement price, I think he's an easy selection. I think he'll probably outscore Chesser, but we'll just have to wait and see. You'll expect Brisbane to control the ball a little bit more. But even though the wing is more of a midfield role than halfback, I actually would have preferred him playing off halfback. Rosie's one that it really starts to get interesting. In the practice match against West Coast, he played quite a big chunk forward. Now, I'm not sure whether that was just to get rotations into some of the other midfielders, because guys like Willem Drew did play centre bounce time, Jason Horne-Francis did. Travis Boak wasn't in there, and Butters wasn't even in the team. So that concerns me a little bit. He's a damaging midfielder, but he's most damaging forward of centre. And he kicked a really good goal forward of centre. He's one that I'm cooling on a little bit and was never really too hot on to begin with. I'm just not sure that he plays heaps of midfield time. And I think the run to finish last year might have been a little bit of an anomaly. Wines wasn't going that well. Butters was interrupted. Port Adelaide were really struggling, so teams probably weren't paying them as much attention, and he kind of got the run of the whole midfield. I don't think it'll be like that. Like, Wines looked a lot better in the practice match, so I think he could be back to his best. Butters coming back into the team. Horne-Francis, they probably prefer as an inside midfielder just because he's stronger around the contest. Rosie's not really strong. He's like nippy and agile to get to the outside, but for clearance and tackle and real strong contested footy, he might not be the guy. So he's a guy that I'm not locking into my team just yet. Harry Sheasel is another rookie. He was pick 3 in the draft. Teammates with Ashcroft, and was the pick after him in the draft. He's an absolute class act. Incredible touch, super clean. He's also strong. Like, he's not athletic, but he's strong and he can break tackles. He just knows where the footy's going to be, and he is a beautiful kick of the footy. Like, excellent finisher, and he's got incredible goal sense. Some of the goals that he kicks, he just knows where the goals are, and he knows how to get his body in a position that he can kick the goal. Now, I think I'm going to be starting with him on my bench, probably. I don't think he'll scored that high playing that half forward role, but I'm expecting him to play at least like the first 5-6 rounds, probably up until the bye if his body's still good. He's also a bit fitter than you would expect for someone that plays his position. He finished quite high up in the yo-yo test for the draftees, which is interesting, and played a few games through the midfield for the Sandy Dragons in his draft year and scored huge. Like, scored a 159 in one of the games, which is higher than Ashcroft scored, higher than Ashcroft's top score. So I'm going to pick him, but put him onto my bench. So at the moment, I've picked everyone apart from Connor Rosie, and explain my reasoning behind that. Rowan Marshall, a little bit like the defenders, is the ruck options are quite thin. Especially looks like there's going to be no rookie ruck options. The couple that there might be, Samson Ryan actually looked quite good for Richmond as a basement rookie. He was playing full forward though, and I think when Tom Lynch comes back, he'll get squeezed out of the side. You got Bryn Teagle at Port Adelaide, who was playing with Lysette. I actually was quite impressed with him. So if he's picked round 1, he could potentially be a good R2 option, or even on the bench. Pardon me. That's something I did with Bruce. it is a lot of money on the bench, but I just don't like having a wasted position. Even though you get the option to loophole having that non-playing player on your bench, I just like everyone playing because, throughout the year you get enough players not playing through no fault of your own. So to put one there, decide to pick a player that's not going to play, I don't know, seems counterintuitive to me. But Marshall, I think he's one of 3 ruck options. Marshall, English and Witts. They're the 3 guys that I'm considering. Witts has got a good run to start the year. Averaged 90 last year, coming off an ACL. Started slowly and then worked into it. He is the absolute number 1 ruck at the Gold Coast and has had a really consistent history. Has averaged 105 before. That was when the Gold Coast were playing a really high stoppage game style though. So I don't expect him to get back to there, but even if he averages 95, maybe pushes 100, I think he could potentially be right up there with the top rucks. But Marshall looks like he's locked in as the number 1 ruck. Based on the practice game, St Kilda, as I mentioned, were missing basically all of their key forwards, and they still refused to play Marshall as a key forward. He was in the ruck against Gawn and Grundy, so it was a tough ask, but I think, we've seen what he can score when he's given that main ruck role. So for me, I'm going to be picking him, as a lot of coaches are. Elliot Yeo, another one of these defenders that's highly owned. Looked really sharp in the practice match. Was taking off, trying to beat tackles, running and bouncing. Just looked like the player that he used to be when he was winning best and fairest in premiership years, as he did for the Eagles. I think priced where he is, he's priced at about 70. You just can't go wrong. As a defender, not that many options in the defence. He's going to be playing midfield time, bit of halfback. He might work into the year, but he's a guy that you just pick, have faith in, and hold on. Injury issues, but, I don't really get the injury thing. If guys have had a full preseason, pick them. If they've had an interrupted preseason, that's when you start to worry about injuries. But for a guy like Yo, all reports are he's trained really well. He looked fit in the game. We'll have another look at him next week. But I think at his price, in the line that he's in, he is a lock. Cornelio's a guy I really want to have a look at because we haven't seen how the Giants are going to play. They didn't play in the first round of practice matches. We're going to see them for the first time this weekend. And that's really going to determine this pick. He's priced at 98. And even though he's a proven scorer, it'll be really interesting to see. He wasn't named captain. And I don't know, he accumulates lots of the ball and he's really quick, but probably a bit like a Rosie. He's not that real strong contested ball winner, and it'd be interesting to see how the Giants go, because if they want to go Tom Green, I think it will be locked in there. But if they want a bit more of, stronger bodies, maybe Harry Perryman gets a run in there, Lockie Ash, and then the classy guy might be Josh Kelly that they throw through the midfield, and Cogs might play a little bit more forward, particularly because the Giants have had a lot of smaller forwards go down with injury in the preseason. So for me, Cogs is a guy that I'm also going to pass on at this stage. Toby McLean, very similar to Cornelio. I just want to see him play first. He did score 100 in the one final that he played last year. Being a final, it didn't contribute to his fantasy profile from last year, so it didn't affect his average. And he comes in really, really cheap. But I just want to have a look at him, see how he's moving and see where he fits into that Bulldogs team. Even though Dunkley and Hunter have come out of the team, they've still got a pretty full midfield brigade. They've got Liberatore, Bond, McRae, not Parrish, Bailey Smith. And then even Treloar is a guy that people probably are forgetting about, but he averaged 96 last year. So for me, I'm just not sure exactly where McLean plays. So he's a wait and see for now. James Cetus, I can only assume, is only there because people maybe remember the hype from last year, and he's a basement price rookie, but he won't be getting a game for the Gold Coast, especially with the guys that they've brought in. Like, he's a very similar type of player to a Blakely and Anderson? Not Noah, the other one. Jed Anderson. Very similar player, but not as good as those guys, so he won't be playing this year. Tom Mitchell is a guy that I never really considered. And then, listening to heaps of people talk about him, his ownership has dropped. Just watching the practice game, he's not going to be the main midfielder at Collingwood. they're going to roll lots of different guys through there. Even if he was the main midfielder, there was still a concern whether their game style would suit him with how fast they move the footy. But with the combination of that, he's getting a little bit older, probably past his prime to an extent, and he's not going to be one of the main three midfielders like some of the teams run. He's going to be swapping through there, a bit of half forward. He's absolute pass for me. Dom Sheed, similar-ish to Elliot Yeo, except doesn't have the defender status. Priced at 70. He's averaged 90-ish in the past. He's a pick that doesn't excite me. I would much rather pick a guy like Josh Ward, who's same price, a little bit more expensive actually, and could potentially break out. Even if they scored the same, like, I would just much rather pick Ward. I prefer watching him. I just like watching the young guys come through their draft year and seeing their progression in the AFL. So this pick doesn't excite me, but I just think priced at what he is, with, like, there's going to be heaps of improvement at West Coast, and something I like to do is sort of hedge my bets by picking a few guys from the one midfield. So with Yeo already in the back line, picking Sheed just gives you that extra cover. So if, say, Yeo doesn't end up playing as much midfield as you thought, Sheed will probably be the guy that gets those extra minutes, and vice versa. Especially with a Jinby as well, who could potentially be in that centre bounce rotation. So for me, I think Sheed's he's at a price where it's not really risky, and he's also at a price where if something goes wrong early in the year, you don't really like it, it's not too much to upgrade to a premium or go down to a rookie. He's in that quite comfortable mid-price range. Keep scrolling down. Doherty's, I never really considered him seriously. Started to a bit like Dunkley, in that if you pick him, you're picking him to save a trade, bringing him in later on, because you're pretty comfortable with he's going to be a top 6 defender. I think he will be a top 6 defender, but I'm a little bit worried now. Walsh out, I don't think he's going to score as well as a midfielder. Hopefully can get the tackle numbers up. But he just got so many of his points from chip marks and running around the back for handballs, clearing the ball from defence. I'm just worried he might get a little bit lost as a midfielder, particularly now Cripps hurt his ankle. Hopefully he'll be right for round 1. But if Cripps is out of that midfield, things could start to fall apart a little bit for Carlton. They've also brought in a few outside guys, like Blake Acres on the wing, probably going to be getting a few of the marks that Doherty used to get, just pushing right back into defence. So for me, Doherty, he's going to be a really close watch this week, but I'm not that keen on him at his current price. He's very expensive. For a defender, defenders don't really score 110 very often. Now, Tim English, he's that other ruckman that I was talking about. I think people might be jumping at shadows a little bit with English, because he's similar to Marshall, clearly number 1 ruck. So for me, it's out of English, Marshall and Witts. I'm probably going to go 2 premium rucks because we don't have options to go like a mid-price or a rookie ruck. And I think what he showed last year was it was a genuine breakout, and one that had been coming for a long time. You can see the way this guy moves, that he's going to be the type of ruckman that's going to rack up heaps of fantasy points because he plays as an extra midfielder, a little bit like Grundy did. Especially in something that you can start seeing to come into his game is his physicality. We saw it a little bit in the grand final of 21. Just started to show a little bit of mongrel, I like that expression. And if he can really bring that tackling pressure, the intensity around the stoppage, he used to look a little bit timid, but he just continues to get bigger and bigger. His marking around the ground is really good, especially for the Bulldogs who like to share the ball around. So I think even he's not going to get huge hit-out numbers, but he'll just win that much of the ball around the ground. And as I mentioned before with the midfield stuff, if I'm picking a couple of Bulldogs midfielders, which it might be with McLean and then Bont and McRae are both quite underpriced, then English could go with them quite well. And you see if the Bulldogs have a few big games, you might get big scores from all of them, and it will sort of compound the results. So for me, I'm going to put English in as my R1, with the backup being Witts. So if there's any injury concern with either of these two, or maybe if I look a little bit closer at the matchups that they've got. So It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to start. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Looking at that, maybe we'll go against English and go with which. Yeah, a few tough matchups to start the year. Maybe I'm overthinking it as well, but that's the whole point of this, just talking about these guys. Will Gould, not sure he exists. I don't think he'll play. Matthew Johnson, I was hoping he'll get an early game. Really rated him highly coming into his draft 2 years ago. I had him like top 10, just maybe he's biased just to really smooth players, but he's just silky smooth, kicks the ball beautifully, like looks like a natural replacement for David Mundy, but they've went out and grabbed Jaeger O'Meara, so I don't think he's going to get a spot in their midfield because it looks like they were only looking at him as an on-baller, and the wings seems like Liam Henry and Aish are on the wings, maybe Nathan O'Driscoll if he can push his way in. Luke Pedlar, lots of talk as a good price and a forward, but watching him play, I think he might be best 22. We'll have to see when Taylor Walker comes back into that team. Provided some decent pressure, but he just looks a little bit off the pace. And that's kind of what we saw last year, I think it was, when he played his couple of games. Just looks a little bit off the pace, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to get involved. The Crows are a high stoppage team, so if they can get lots of forward 50 stoppages and he can tackle there, maybe he'll get involved, but I just can't see him winning much of the footy, so he's a pass for me at the moment. Samson Ryan mentioned before as one of these R3 guys. I think at this stage, he's as good as anyone. The one guy I did mention was Bryn Teakle, but I need to see that again and be confident that he's going to be playing at least the first 5 or so games for Port Adelaide. So for me, I'm just going to lock in Samson Ryan at R3, have him on my bench. Jordan Dawson, a little bit surprising. I'm not sure why he's so highly owned. Because he averaged less than Sinclair. I guess Sinclair's got the new coach, and it looks like they're going to be chipping and marking the ball less off halfback, and Dawson's just that next guy. But for me, he doesn't really present any value, and especially I expect the Crows to get quite a lot of improvement this year. Miller has also gone down to halfback, will get a little bit more ball off of halfback, whereas last year it was pretty much all Dawson, and I can expect him to push up more onto the wing and even float across half forward, where he's more damaging, but he's not going to be scoring as well. So for me, Jordan Dawson is another fade. Cam Mackenzie is a rookie that I really like coming through. Hawks, similarly to Josh Ward last year, have picked a really composed, good decision maker, good ball user with their top 10 pick. I expect him to play early. An injury was the only reason he didn't play against Geelong. And the guy that is probably a little bit behind him in the pecking order in Henry Hustwaite did play and played really well. I really don't like the ball use of Warple in that midfield. So I would love to see Mackenzie in there, and I think if Sam Mitchell is thinking similarly, and hopefully similarly to how he used Josh Ward last year, then he will play Mackenzie. So Mackenzie will come in as well. As you can see, pretty much just got rookies in the midfield at the moment, but yeah, that, like as I mentioned, that's going to be the strategy, is lots of rookies through the midfield, a few value guys in defence, and then we'll probably have to look around the 300k price range, and then up forward, a few value options, probably spending a bit more up forward. Where are we at? Josh Sin, another guy, played his first season last year. Good price, mid-forward status is handy, but from the sound of things, his conditioning, he had off-season surgery and he's not going to be ready for round 1. So he's a guy that I'm going to look straight past. Josh Steele, or Jack Steele, at the Saints, a little bit similar to Sinclair, is at his price, 110, even though he's shown he can score really, really well, that was in the same mould as Tuke Miller, same mould as Rory Laird last year. In a team that's not making finals, you're by far the best midfielder, and he had this runaway season. Last year, Brad Crouch played more, got a little bit more help in there, shared the load, And this year, expecting less tackle numbers from these St Kilda mids and a little bit less marks, which is where he got a lot of his score from. Just not sure that he'll find as much footy with the Saints. They look like they're handballing and going fast off halfback, and that doesn't play into him. Like he would get a few marks coming off that halfback line that aren't going to be there anymore, and maybe a few less stoppages. So for me, Steele's a guy that I'm not looking at yet, but we'll have another look in the preseason, in the final round of preseason matches. Tom Green, a guy that everyone thinks is just poised for a breakout. Averaged about 100 over the first 5 weeks of last season. Giants have moved out 2 big inside midfielders. And even though Cogs and Kelly are still there, and they are midfielders, the 2 guys that they moved out are the 2 most similar to Green. Like Hopper in particular is that first touch from the ruck. He's going to get the first disposal at a stoppage. That real inside hard nut ball winner, like extractor. And that's the role that Green's going to play. So I think he's going to be locked in that midfield. The only thing we need to see is the Giants' game style, similar to the Bulldogs. All the Bulldogs and Giants players haven't actually watched them play against another team this year. It reportedly had 50 touches in an intra-club, but it doesn't really matter. I want to see him play against actual opposition before I make my mind up. But he's one that I'm looking quite closely at as a value guy, priced around 80. So I think he's a good option. I haven't picked any Bulldogs or Giants players at this stage just because I want to have a look at them. So I'll keep that the same, but he's a guy that I'm really strongly considering. James Worpel, as I mentioned before, looks like he's going to get strong midfield usage, but even against Geelong, they got smashed. But Jai Newcomb looked good. Josh Ward came into the game in the second quarter, looked really good, collected heaps of footy, used it well. I just think Worpel doesn't use the ball well at all, and they could probably do better as an inside mid. They might just want the harder body, more seasoned player, even though he's not that old. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan. At his price, he is very, very lowly priced. If Cam Mackenzie comes into that team and he's still one of the main centre bounce midfielders, I might consider him more. But I don't think he's. Yeah, I don't think he's making Hawthorn that much better, to be honest. Darcy Cameron, I'm worried he's sharing the ruck with Mason Cox, and it wouldn't take much, but I think there's just stronger options. I think all of Witts, Marshall, and English will score more than Cameron as a ruckman, and in the forward line we've got heaps of good forward options, so I'm not looking at Darcy Cameron this year. I think something that is important to try and avoid is kind of trying to catch up for last season. I missed Cameron last year. He was one of the big mistakes I made last year, and I regretted that, obviously. But I think people can kind of get caught up in how good a value a player was last year and sort of assume that's going to continue on. But a lot of the times it won't. So for me, Cameron is a guy I'm not really looking at. Andrew Brayshaw, he's one of the midfielders that I'm genuinely considering. So him and Oliver are 2 guys that I don't see any question marks on their role. And they're just such powerful scorers. Brayshaw with his marks and the way that Fremantle play and the big open Optus Stadium ground, I think he'll pretty much keep going at that 110 average, which will make him a clear top 6 midfielder. And Oliver, he's just a beast. You can't really stop him, even if you try to. He got tagged a few times last year, still went 112. He just wins so much of the footy, and I think he's starting to get involved a little bit more on the outside with his marks. So they are 2 guys that I'm considering with my team at the moment. I think they're probably 2 guys I could lock in. I've got heaps of rookies in the midfield, so I can look at a couple of genuine premiums. Good age range as well. Brayshaw's 2017 draft, so he's coming into his 6th year, which is the year that players make the biggest jump, apart from their first one. And Oliver, his 2015 draft. So he's coming into his 8th year, right in the prime of his career. They also, Oliver not so much. Oliver does win heaps of the footy, but Brayshaw's just got a fantastic score build with the amount of marks and tackles that he gets. So how many more players have we got? Okay, I'll try and get through this a little bit quicker. Van Rooyen, lots of talk about him in the pre-season, but like a tall, genuine key forward, inexperienced, and didn't come on until very late in the Melbourne versus Saints game, which is a bad indicator, especially in a practice game. You'd think if he was a chance, he would play earlier. Sicily, I was concerned against Geelong. He played lockdown defence on Jeremy Cameron. So in the first quarter, first half, he didn't really touch the ball much. But then in the second half of the game, he started to free up a lot more and got heaps of just cheap junk marks, which is what you'd be expecting from him. Playing for the Hawks, they're presumably not going to be that good this year, especially that showing against Geelong. Ball's going to be in their defence a lot, and hopefully they can use Sicily. Scrimshaw's actually one that did get a lot of the footy as well down back, but for me, that's the one query I've got on him is I'm worried against some of the really good tall forward lines in the competition. He's going to be too worried about defending to really score. Jacob Edwards, one from North Melbourne. I've never actually seen him play. He didn't play in the practice match. I think there's a few guys ahead of him, like Charlie Comben. Still got Goldstein floating around and Jerry rucked in that game, so I just don't think he's going to play. Weddle played against the Cats on the wing, had heaps of time out on the wing, especially in that first half, but really looked lost. Understandable, given he was playing the Cats, so I'll give him another look next practice match. But at this stage, I think worst case scenario would pick him and play him on the bench, but I just can't see him scoring. He looks like more of a key defender. He's really athletic, but playing in a bad side on the wing, not really a recipe for points. Touk Miller, he's another guy that I have considered as a premium. A bit like Steele, sometimes it's a little bit easy just to get caught up in the one season and expect that he'll get back to that. But like Steele, he's still priced pretty high and is the number one tag target still at the Suns. Maybe Norrie Anderson goes past him in that regard this year, but for me it's a pass just because of that. Still priced fairly high, number one tag target, and a little bit of an interrupted preseason with that hamstring. Tom Stewart, he's like a real make or break pick. He could average 80, and he could average 105. Comes in priced at 95, I think. Yeah. For me, I haven't really considered him just because I think there are better options. There's one guy in particular I'm looking at as a premium in defence. I just want to see a little bit more, especially GMHBA. Yeah, it doesn't really play at GMHBA early. And yeah, I think similar to Sicily, he's a guy that might be a little bit concerned with defending and doesn't quite seagull as much as some of the other halfbacks that I prefer to pick. Jack McRae seems like a relatively obvious selection. A little bit like Tom Mitchell. We'll just assume he gets back to his best. Unlike Tom Mitchell, though, he's still playing in a very fantasy-friendly team. We'll have to see if they've made any tweaks to move the ball a little bit faster. But I think last year was a little bit of an aberration, and he gets back to his best. He's just one of like the absolute guns of fantasy footy over the last, 10 years almost. So put him in at M3 and probably shift a couple of guys to the bench. So move Philippou to the bench because he will be playing half forward. Mackenzie will be playing midfield, so we can keep him on field with Phillips and Ashcroft. And we keep moving down this list. Okay, Rory Laird, just priced too high, and I think Adelaide will improve. And the best thing for Adelaide is to give their younger mids more exposure, not to have Rory Laird just running the whole show, getting 35 touches a game. They'll continue playing that high stoppage, high tackle game style, but I just don't think they'll rely on him as much. And a little bit like, well, very similar to the Steele and Miller thing, finishing the year really strongly in a struggling team. Even if he starts the year slow, you'll be able to get him at a better price because 120 is ridiculous. Charlie Constable, one that I heard he was playing halfback at the Suns. Didn't really understand it because from what I remembered, he wasn't really a quick outside type. He was like a big inside midfielder, but watching the game, he 100% looks like a guy that they've earmarked to play that rebounding halfback role, at least until Weller and Powell get back into the side. So we'll have to keep a close look on when they're due back, but for me, as I mentioned before, defence is a little bit shaky. I'm just going to lock him in on the back line, expecting him to get 70s or 80s, which is more than fieldable at his price. A little bit of a stepping stone because I'm not expecting him to keep that role for the whole year, but he doesn't need to be in my team for the whole year either. Moving on down, Horne-Francis at the Power. He's going to be playing a lot of midfield time. That's what I've gathered from the match sim. It's going to be him, Wines, Butters and Rosie maybe a little bit forward. He's going to get heaps of midfield time. Priced at 60. It's pretty tempting. I just want to see him put up some decent numbers in that next practice game, final practice game coming up this week. So for me, he's a watch, but a pass. George Wardlaw is still going through some conditioning. He had a few hamstring issues last year. I think he's going to be the best player in that draft, by the way. Maybe not better than Ashcroft. Ashcroft looks like a freak. I vastly underestimated how good he was, but he's my favourite player. I think he's just sensational. Love the way he plays, similar to like a Caleb Sarong, but he's got more explosive power than Sarong. I just think he's a gun. I don't think North Melbourne have lost anything really. Wardlaw and Horne-Francis, I think, very, very comparable, and I just prefer Wardlaw because he's such a pure inside extractor. Hayden Young, guy that I think a lot of people called on after watching the practice match, but it was against Adelaide, and the style that they play, really, really high pressure, high stoppage, high contested game, and on a smaller ground, it looked like, is the opposite to what Young likes. He likes winning lots of footy on the outside. Luke Ryan also missing, so maybe he was defending a bit more than usual. That backline was chopping and changing a lot. I want to have another really close look at him. But unlike Dacos, he doesn't show that much urgency to get the footy, and he doesn't run around getting little handballs, getting tackles. He seems quite content to sit back, hold good defensive shape, but that's not what I want as a fantasy coach. So he's a guy that I've cooled on a little bit. Bailey Humphrey, he's one guy that I thought would be ready to play AFL early just because of his frame and how strong he is in the contest. That looks to be the case. So he's a guy that I'll be looking at as a forward rookie. Midfield is starting to fill up pretty quickly. So similar to Sheasel, I expect Humphrey to play a little bit more on ball. He's not as good a finisher as Sheasel. So he's really powerful, wins heap of the footy, and had some huge games in the NAB League. Like, he had a game where he had 30 disposals and 9 shots on goal and kicked 4 goals, 5. Whereas Sheasel doesn't win as much of the footy, can do, but he's just a lot more pure and clean in his finishing. He's, sensational player. Alrighty, where are we at? Oh, Fergus Green, I skipped over him. He just looked like a really smart forward and a great replacement for, what's his name? Jack Gunston. So he's a guy that I'm really looking at. It's him and Joe Menzie looked good. Might see him a little bit later, but yeah, I'm going to put him in, actually. Basement price, yeah, he just looked really good. Hitting up for marks. Hawthorn will struggle, that's the only thing, but I think you can go wrong. I think he'll play. I don't think he's, also a few people have been sort of positing that he's only in the team because Mitch Lewis is out, but I don't think so. I think he's a replacement for, I forgot his name again. Gunston, yeah. He plays much more similar role to Gunston, like a lead-up forward. He's not like a big contested marking forward. Okay, Sinclair. Just Fremantle. I'm looking at the jersey above him. Ross Lyon, he doesn't want them to chip around on halfback. They were the number 1 team for marks last year. Sinclair got heaps of his points from marks. So I just think he'll have a drop-off because of that. Brayshaw is one guy I'm really keen on. If Salem isn't in the round one team, I think I'm going to pick Brayshaw because he just was all across halfback in that game, incidentally against St Kilda. If I see similar role and similar output in the second practice match, I'm going to lock Brayshaw in as my D1, and I'm going to do that as of now. So almost filled the defence, almost filled the midfield. One more ruck, a couple more forwards. Moving through, Luke Jackson doesn't look like he's getting much ruck time. He's going to play as a forward. They need the height down there now that Rory Lobb's out of the team. And Darcy's a good ruckman. So I think might have to bide his time. He's just more. I think he's just more dangerous forward. Can win those one-on-ones, and he's very good follow-up. Whereas Darcy, if he plays forward, I think you're losing a bit of that ground level impact. Whereas Jackson can impact in the air and at ground level, makes him a sort of perfect forward target. Max Heath played a little bit. I didn't really watch him that closely, to be honest, but I'm not really considering him. Just because, I don't know, maybe I should look closer at him, but I think Marshall's number one ruck. Can't see him getting heaps of opportunity. Angus Sheldrick is a really, really tough inside mid from WA, coming into his second year. Looks like he's playing a pressure forward role. Like Matty Roberts got a run over Sheldrick in the centre bounces. Okay, here we go. Luke Davies-Uniacke. He's a guy that I hadn't really considered too much, but watching him in the match sim and looking back at his stats, I think he's a guy who will absolutely break out this year. Very, very keen on him. And that completes my midfield. So I've got my 4 premiums here. A couple of them underpriced. And then 2 big dogs that I'll look at for captain options. Potentially, if I was to remove one of these, it would be Brayshaw. I think he's a bit easier to stop and might get tagged early, but he's got a lot of early games at Optus, which I like for his marking game. Okay, 3 million left in the salary, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What's that? 500k per position. All right, I need a couple of cheap guys. Just rolling through. Sardis is injured. He won't play. Merritt, just one of the best fantasy scorers, similar to McRae over the last 6-8 years. But I think first tag target and just unsure how the Bombers are going to play, so I'll pass on him. Drury, I was keen on. I thought he was a steal going pick 1 in the rookie draft. I thought he was like a second round talent, or at worst third round. So North did well picking him up. He was a captain of Vic Metro, I think, or Oakley Chargers. So he's got leadership potential. Mid forward status is handy, but I just didn't see any of him. So calling on him. Cribs, just first tag target and doesn't win enough of the ball around the ground. Joe Richards, likewise, didn't see him for Collingwood. Elijah Hewitt only came on in the last quarter of the practice match, but looked really impressive. Kicked a great goal and was just powerful and attacked the footy, laid some big hits. So, yeah, really impressed by him. Just not sure if he squeezes into that round 1 team. I've got 1 spot left on my bench. So if I don't see another rookie mid here, yeah, I'll just chuck him in. He looks like he could score, and like hopefully, obviously, West Coast would have been watching that practice game. It was really impressive, and I think for a team that's trying to find positives, I think they'll be better than people expect. But he's an early draft pick. Put him in there. Just see what he can do. First few rounds, you can always rest him, put him back to the waffle afterwards, but give him a go in the cauldron of round 1. A guy, yeah, if he plays, it'd be interesting to see his role next week. Another one watching next week. So already after 1 defender. Another ruckman. Okay, so Jared Witts, as I mentioned before, clear number 1 ruck, looked super dominant playing against Essendon, even though they didn't it wasn't even Draper for the first half. It was their second string ruck. What's his name? Nick Bryan. So I'm going to put Witts in just cheaper. And looking at the run that English has had, I want to have a closer look at English. English could quite easily come in for Witts just because I think he's got a higher ceiling with his work around the ground. But Witts will just be rock solid and reliable. Okay, down to 2 million. Got 5 places to go. Bontempelli. Oh, Bontempelli's one that I'm actually really keen on. Okay. Bontempelli's coming in. Brayshaw's coming out. And, okay, look. This isn't maybe the wisest decision, but I'm making some rash changes. Bontempelli's coming in. Bailey Smith is coming in. As I mentioned before, putting a few guys from the one midfield in the team, especially Bulldogs. We know Bulldogs have been like the highest scoring fantasy midfield for what seems like the past 5 years. Dunkley's out. Libba doesn't win heaps of the footy. He's the main inside extractor, so hopefully hedge my bets a little bit and just get these three Bulldogs. If they can all go, say, 105, McRae and Smith are priced at 105. Bond's priced at about 100, but if they could go 105, 110 even, that'd be fantastic. And if throughout the year you see maybe one of them's not getting quite as much midfield time as maybe I hoped, then I just trade out the one that isn't getting that time, and that's when I can go up to someone like a Brayshaw, who's hopefully dropped a little bit in price. 3 forwards. Where are all the forwards at? Connor McKenna, one more defender. Okay, so Connor McKenna very similarly priced to the other guy that I'm looking at in Jaden Hunt. I watched a little bit of the Lions Sydney game, but it was just horrible. Like, it was so windy and wet and, yeah, like a low camera angle. Couldn't really see much. So I want to watch the properly televised practice game to have a look at him. The other guy is Jaden Hunt, who looks like, I think he's got a halfback/wing role at the Eagles, just bringing a bit more pace. Zach Butters, I think he's a better scorer than Rosie and a worse forward. So I think he plays midfield. If I see him next week, I think I'll be picking him. Just love the way he goes about it. You can't not like Zach Butters. Okay, now, midfield's full. Need a defender. Lockie Cowan, he did a few good things in that match. Hey, there we go, Jaden Hunt. Okay, so I'm going to pick Hunt, as I mentioned before. Just looks like he's going to get that role. West Coast like chipping the ball around off halfback. Oh, I'm running out of money. 1.1 million for 3 spots. So now we've got Dunkley, Taranto, Butters, a couple of cheap forwards. Who have I got? I've got Humphrey and Sheasel, so I could go very cheap. Radicalia. Looks like he's playing defence for the Cats, but that could be because DeConning moved forward to cover Hawkins. I have to see a little bit more of that. Kate Chandler did play. Okay, yeah, Ben King. I think he plays all year. I scrolled past him before. Oscar Allen, I think very similar. Key forwards, hopefully a little bit like Charlie Curnow did last year. Missed the whole season, get a big discount. They just play every game. You know the team, they're being looked for as targets. Hopefully West Coast and Gold Coast can be pretty good. Kick a few goals, average, 50 or 60, and at least be fieldable. I'll see how much money that leaves me. 420. Okay, I might have enough to upgrade one of them. And Sturt. I think Sturt just plays, smaller, like mid-sized forward. He plays, probably put him on my bench. Chuck Humphrey on field. And that leaves me with 222. Okay, all right. I'm looking. First thing I think is Allen's a little bit more than Ben King. Even though he looked good in the trial, I'm thinking if I put 200k on one of them, I can get them up to a decent forward. So we'll see. With Allen out, it gets me up to 580. Who can I afford? Okay, Toby McLean. Similar thing, Bulldogs midfield. Leaves me 173. Is that enough to get Wits up to English? I'm thinking not. Yes, it is. Okay, cool. So we got heaps of Bulldogs in there. They're a high-scoring team. English, Marshall, McLean, Smith, Bont, McRae. Got 79k left. Is there anything I want to change? Oh, I could get one of these cheaper guys. Okay. I'll leave it as is for now. Just potentially, if Cowan plays and Chesser doesn't, I could upgrade one of them to him. So, hope that was as entertaining for you as it was for me. I think this is a pretty vanilla fantasy set side. The only thing would maybe be the 3 Bulldogs, but I like that. I did that last year, actually, and did all right. Finished 266th last year, but I was in the top 10 around the buys. Made some bad trades around the buys. And that's going to be my next video, is all the things that I learnt from last season. But this is a look at pretty close to what my team is looking like after the first round of practice matches. Second round of practice matches, we'll be able to see everything more clearly and get stats. So things could change a little bit, but that's how it's shaping up at the moment. Thanks for listening. I will see you next time. That's the wrong button.